Welcome to the Daily Objective. It is day 27 of the war in Israel. I'm joined today by Jonathan Hoenig. Jonathan and I will talk about the real collateral damage in Israel's war. Of course, that is a title. We'll explain what that means when we get to it. Before we do get to it, I have some news updates. Yeah, I mean we're going to get to this in our topic. This is kind of a spoiler, but the number of soldiers dead so far since the ground operation in Gaza started is now 19. And Yeah, we'll get into why that is. That is what's wrong with what Israel is doing. But in the meantime, there have been many more rockets fired from Gaza throughout the day. A building was destroyed. A home was destroyed in the Tel Aviv area. I don't know that there were any casualties there, but there were many rockets also fired from the north, from Lebanon. One in the town of Kiryat Shmona had many people injured. And remember, these are places that are mostly evacuated. Over 200,000 Israelis have been evacuated from their homes, either in the north of Israel or in the south, in the Gaza Strip region or area around Gaza Strip. So the IDF has fired back. They have been striking in South Lebanon, I think more than they have so far, and a bit further to the north. Now, there's also Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. He's going to make a speech tomorrow, and this has been in the news for the past few days. This is Hezbollah had like a promo video for this speech. It's a weird thing, but yeah, he's selling it. So whatever he says in that speech will there's something is coming. I don't know if I don't expect this to be the way that Hezbollah decides that they're going to go all out. They're not going to announce it in a speech. They're going to do it. But yeah, I'd watch out for that. And being more hopeful than I probably should expect from Israel, I hope they know where he is, and maybe that'll be the surprise in the speech, that it'll be suddenly cut off mysteriously. But I doubt it. There's also in Israel, there's this weird issue of there's funds that Israel is supposed to transfer to the Palestinian Authority run by Fatah. This is it's like over $150 million. The finance minister doesn't want to do it. The rest of the government does, and the IDF does as well. I mentioned yesterday at the start of this show that I was watching the press conference with the defense secretary right before. He was asked about this, and usually you don't expect government ministers to debate each other in press conferences, but he said, this is not okay. The money should be transferred immediately. This is one of those things that what lessons have been learned? I mean, what lessons have been learned from October 7th? What lessons have been learned from decades of trying to do this, and not just Israel? The U.S. does it as well. They see terrorists somewhere that are a threat to the U.S., so they look for terrorists that are supposedly at this point in time, right now, like 5:34 p.m. on November 2nd, these terrorists seem a little less bad. So let's give them money. I don't understand the reasoning behind it. It's really depressing. It shows, and all of Israel's response to October 7th shows that Israel, will hit back specifically against the people who did this, and not try to identify the problem, the different ways in which the problem manifests itself, and solve it wherever it is, wherever it rears its ugly head. You shoot it down. You don't fund it. Jonathan, do you have any thoughts on that before we go to the main topic, so I can calm down for a bit and have a sip of water?
Yeah, well, just first to applaud you and your team, Razi, who've been bringing such desperately needed perspective on what's been just an ongoing horror. You mentioned some of the missiles. It's been an ongoing as I understand it, ceaseless barrage of what 7 or 8 thousand missiles just lobbed haphazardly into Israel, military sites, residential sites. Who knows where they land? And here we have Israel trying to retaliate as an effort of self-defense with what it seems, at least from my perspective, just a civilian perspective here, so many of their hands tied behind their back in terms of actually winning a war, not just waging a war, but winning the war, eliminating the threat, ending the threat, making the threat non-threatening. So, I mean, I know I'm following not only your Twitter, but also, the IDF's Twitter and so many who are reporting from the front lines and, just wishing the IDF and the commandos, both Israeli and American, all of our good wishes as they go and try to avenge and bring some justice into now 3 weeks on, you realize was just an unspeakable horror show.
Yeah, by the way, the IDF Twitter is definitely better to follow for information about what's going on. I think my Twitter is better to follow and for the ideas that of how this war should be won. But yeah, follow both and yeah, that this is kind of where we're what we're going to talk about today because 19 soldiers died in Gaza so far, and that's in just over 48 hours. This is it's they died unnecessarily. These are not necessary deaths, which might happen in a war. But this is not the case here. Israel, as we've said every day since the war started, and many, many times before this war, in previous rounds, or just when talking about Israel, Israel's top priority seems to be to defend its enemy. It makes no sense, the way it fights. What makes sense is the results that we see each time, which is the enemy getting stronger. And even among the Israeli public now, where I've said, the Israeli public is much better than the Israeli leadership on this. They say we have to destroy Hamas. They talk about, yeah, we don't care about civilian casualties. They care about obviously the hostages being held in Gaza. But there is a consensus that these lives lost are have to be lost. I don't know to what extent this is. I don't know if you lose a loved one, do you say, well, yeah, I understand, we can't kill civilians because on CNN, they're gonna say that we were mean or evil or something. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking back, and maybe somebody in our super chat can remind me of the exact language. But at some point, Razi, Miss Rand writes about what makes politics important, and I think, as I'm recalling now, something effective, yeah, those elected leaders do make decisions on your behalf, are acting, as your proxies in effect. And what makes it so important that who is Hamas supported by, who elected Hamas, who gives legitimacy to Hamas? Is it, I believe it's the people, of the people in the area. It's those people that even tacitly support Hamas, accept them, want to have them around. And I just learned this past week, and this was news to me, is Hamas, as I understand it, Razi, actually has their headquarters right below the hospital. The actual the hospital. So they put Israel in this impossible position. Israel is acting in self-defense. They on the 7th, how many hundreds and hundreds of people were absolutely butchered. Israel wants to act in self-defense, but they're put in this impossible position because Hamas truly is that evil. They put their own people in direct the line of fire, knowing that they are cannon fodder.
Yeah, I mean, all that is true, although in a sense, they're not putting their people in the line of fire when they put them under a hospital. So because they know Israel won't attack. That's the shocking thing here. The Shifa hospital has been known for many years to be the place underneath which Hamas has its headquarters. Israel did this press conference last week showing proof. Now, this proof, I guarantee you, is insufficient for those who already hate Israel and will think that everything Israel says is a lie. But the other side of it is, if they're there, why are you fighting a PR war? Their war is not a PR war, although they do fight it, to an extent by their proxies in Western media, and they're winning that war. But they're fighting an actual military war, a savage terrorist war in which they slaughter innocent civilians.
Yeah, they play on Israel's humanity. I mean, it was reported this week, Razi, that members of the Knesset saw the film. I understand that's been circulated among journalists of all these unspeakable atrocities. And I asked on Twitter this week, what kind of a human being can gleefully cut off the head of another human being? What kind of hatred of man, kind of qua man, do you have to destroy a human body like that? So you have, I think again, as Rand identified in 1979 on Donahue, you have these tribal savages and an advanced largely rights respecting modern civilization. And I know who I support, and I am distressed to see how many hold Israel to a standard that Hamas is not held to at all.
Yeah, in the early days of the war, I made a point of describing a lot of what happens in those videos, and I've also made a point of we're not going to share any of those on any of our YouTube shows. I don't share them on Twitter, but we have shared the link to a website that has all of them. Daniel, I don't know if you have that handy, but if you do, like, if people do want to see that, and especially if you are trying, we've been discussing how do you talk to people about this topic if they're not, they don't have clarity, and I said I just don't, because I can't take it. But if you do, yeah, I think that's one thing to do, and to remind people, as I've said in recent days, like, this is not a problem that only Israel is facing. This is a problem when you see the savages in the streets in London. Jonathan, you had them in Chicago as well. The pro-Hamas savages who went out from while the attack was happening, went out to celebrate it, to now what they're calling protests. But in these protests, they chant the genocidal, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free chant. They chant. By the way, they're now chanting ceasefire now. Ceasefire now is ceasefire. Let's unpack that. Ceasefire now means now that Hamas has done what they wanted to do and has achieved their goals to the extent that they had, now is when we need to have a ceasefire. Now that their operation is finished, and they're preparing for the next one. Let's get out of their way. Let's make sure they can prepare. Let's make sure they don't have anybody in their way when they're firing rockets. The demand for ceasefire is the demand for Israel to stop trying to prevent October 7th from happening again.
Yeah, I mean, it's so incomprehensible to me, Razi, to see the protests here in Chicago, the protests all around the world, and think, well, what if it was your neighborhood where rockets were just coming down indiscriminately? How can you live when you're constantly under attack? And then all of a sudden, one day you wake up and your entire neighborhood is overwhelmed with savages, and I think you can use that term in this place. In this case, who are beheading people, shooting your pets, in just episodes. You're supposed to just say, oh, well, let's let bygones be bygones. I mean, Israel has been, in my opinion, much too restrained. And thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Bonnie, for your support of Ayn Rand Center UK and all we're doing. And, again, I was so, sobered, Razi, to go back and listen to Miss Rand's answer on that famous 1979 Donahue, and her assessment of Hamas, I believe, could be applied to Islamic Jihad or Fatah or any of these radical Islamist groups over the years. And she's right. They haven't changed in hundreds of years, and they haven't changed since 1979, when Rand correctly called them the savages that they are.
Yeah, and that's a point to be made about the wider issue. Jonathan, you mentioned how the people support Hamas in Gaza, and it's not just that they elected Hamas and with a big majority, but the minority also voted for terrorists. They just voted for nationalists rather than Islamist terrorists. So yeah, and that's a distinction that I'm trying to fight against and avoid making at the very least. There's a distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people. Hamas was a representative of the Palestinian people in this attack. As soon as the gates came down, 3,000 or more than 3,000 savages came through the gates and went and committed the worst atrocities they possibly could. When they brought back, you can see videos of soldiers, dead bodies of hostages, civilian hostages, old people, children, anything in between, brought back, and people celebrating in the streets. The people who didn't know, who weren't part of it, the innocent civilians were out celebrating that these atrocities happened, just like we've seen, by the way, to some extent in Western countries. But luckily, in Western countries, it is not. It is not. I don't know if it's the majority, but it's certainly not unanimous as it seems to be on the Palestinian side. Now, if there are people who are innocent, this is the thing about somebody using a human shield. If somebody takes me hostage and uses me as a human shield in London, or takes you, Jonathan, and goes around Chicago shooting at people, and somebody defends themselves and shoots back at us, and we get hit, that is the fault of the person holding the human hostage. So the human shield. So I don't understand this. Yeah.
All of these deaths are the fault 100% of Hamas. And to me, it's irrelevant if Israel, for whatever reason, however many, quote, civilians happen to be killed. This is 100% on Hamas. They started this, they precipitated it, and Israel has no choice but to conduct its self-defense. I just think, again, Razi, this juxtaposition. You have Hamas and all of this militant Islam, whose seemingly its sole purpose is to destroy Israel. And you have Israel, a largely rights-respecting country, whose purpose, again, from my perspective, is to primarily leave people free. Now, there's the draft, we can talk about that, but primarily leave people free. They pursue the arts, they pursue the media and writing and technology, and build this prosperous civilization. So it's kind of night and day when you compare these two civilizations. All the deaths are 100% on Hamas, and they're to blame regardless.
Yeah, so there was these pictures from the refugee camp. I think it was I don't remember which refugee camp, but there were these pictures like yesterday or the day before of the refugee camp. Parts of it destroyed. A few buildings were taken down, and this is, the media was careful about how they reported, because they reported the blood libel of the Al-Ahli hospital as fact a couple of weeks ago. So now they're a bit more careful. But they still reported it as, this looks bad and so on. And I saw Piers Morgan tweet about it. And Piers Morgan, if you watch his interviews with Hamas apologists, it might confuse you because he interrupts them. It might confuse you to think that he disagrees with him. He doesn't. He is on the Hamas side, as this tweet will show. He just likes to interrupt anybody he interviews. That's he's an equal opportunity interrupter in that sense. And so he tweets, well, it doesn't matter if a terrorist is hiding there, you can't bomb that place, which, again, what does that mean in practice? What it means is you should allow a terrorist to freely operate, to plan and execute terrorist attacks against your people if he is hiding behind his people. So yeah, we need to actually be vigilant here and not let these people get away with pretending to be some sort of humanitarians when they talk about ceasefires, when they talk about don't attack civilians, when it's Hamas that you're attacking who are hiding behind civilians. All these people are taking the side of Hamas, and we need to be clear on that.
Thank you to Tom, who's been a member for 16 months. We so appreciate your membership, Tom. And this comment, Tom writes, the pro-statists will support the collectivists over the individualists, especially if the latter are stronger, but that strength is not essential. So basically, is it like, Razi, is what Tom is saying? It's kind of the poor collectivist Palestinians. They get kind of the altruism that pervades everyone's philosophy, kind of says that they're the victim, and tough mean successful Israel are the evil ones?
Yeah. By the way, Tom's comment, I don't know how it reminded me of this, but maybe because we've spoken over the past few weeks how there's this weird thing in America where, many on the left support Hamas, and the Palestinians, but also Ukraine, and then many on the right support Israel, but also Russia, which that's not how it goes. Unless you will support the strong or the weak, or the apparently strong or the apparently weak in any conflict. That's the only way that equation works. But a news item that I actually forgot to mention in my update at the beginning is that there were reports that the Wagner Group, the Russian militia group that is kind of freelance terrorists and who work with Russia, are sending some. It was said anti-aircraft missiles to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Of course, this is very dangerous for Israel because Israel will need to use aircraft frequently and probably more frequently in Lebanon once Hezbollah decides that it's time for Israel to defend itself a bit more. So yeah, and Russia, by the way, has sided with Hamas from day one, from before day one. They are allies of Iran. They are allies of pretty much any bad actor in the world stage. Russia is behind them.
And kind of telling back to where we started with Razi, this idea, as I understand it, Putin is very popular in Russia. Putin would get elected again today in Russia. People are satisfied with, despite hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dead Russians, Putin is popular. So it kind of goes back to this idea of what we've been touching on is that the people are such innocent victims of their government, or is it the people that make the government possible, either by their expressed, support or even their tacit support by being silent and not speaking up?
Yeah, yeah, and back to the point of soldiers, Israeli soldiers being unnecessary deaths in this war, or their deaths being unnecessary. This is again something that's unique to the West, unique to how Israel and America fight. There are rules of war that only Western countries abide by, and their enemies don't. And then there's the stage in which, or the stages in which this is judged, which is the UN, where most countries are dictatorships and they all have equal votes, or the UN Security Council, where 5 countries have veto power, including Russia and China. And Yeah, I mean, the West, if humanity survives and hundreds of years from now, historians look at this, they, I think, will be shocked by the way the West is seemingly trying to, it's like you play basketball with a kid and you're like, I don't know, stepping aside so that they, you let them win, which is legitimate to some extent when you play basketball with a kid, but it's not legitimate when you fight a war against savages.
Well, I'll just say, what I feel sad for is like how many millions and millions of uh, young people from the Islamic world whose lives would have been so much better over the years of this strain of radical Islam had been eradicated in 1979 or any time around there. How many people have been raised with this terrible ideology, this totally anti-life ideology that are, it's like you have Israeli young people who are going to university and studying and working and making money, and you have all these Palestinian kids who run around with the AKs on the back of the pickups, whose whole life is making war, making a theocratic war. And it's, just the difference between ideas, right? And the importance of ideas, going back to what Rand always says, it's ideas that move the world. And you have almost this perfect juxtaposition of where Western pro-life, pro-reality ideas are present, and just the opposite on the Palestinian side.
This attack happened less than a month after the 30-year anniversary of the Oslo Accords being signed on the White House lawn, between Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister back then, and Yasser Arafat, This was a big deal in Israel. Finally, we have peace. The peace will be kept by Yasser Arafat and his tens of thousands of terrorists who were imported from Tunisia and given weapons to control their territories and make sure terrorist attacks don't happen against Israel. It was 4 months later when the first bus blew up and in Dizengoff Center in Israel, and then terrorism became a thing. And I think at least again the people of Israel who weren't entirely on the same page as the government kind of realized that the idea of peace isn't really something that's possible. I kind of sarcastically would call people who are in their 30s or mid 30s or less. I would sarcastically call them the peace generation because they're the generation who have experienced the results of trying to make peace with terrorists and are therefore not on the side of peace. I think October 7th made people completely give up on the idea of peace, certainly in Israel. By the way, they're called the victory generation because they are, this is not my term, but that's what they're being called because they are motivated to win this war. But yeah, the idea of peace has kind of gone away, and I don't think it should. I think if you haven't watched the reality show from yesterday where I presented my peace plan, which guarantees a long-lasting peace in the Middle East and I think worldwide, you should watch that. You should share that. I'm pretty sure the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States are regular viewers of the reality show, but if just in case, if you have a direct line of communication with them, you should send them that episode, or at least cut out the part where I present my peace plan. There is a possibility for peace, but it does involve first victory, first identifying that there's an enemy and it's a real war, then victory, and then there will be peace.
Yeah, I remember hearing in a documentary a couple of years ago, the Islamic understanding of peace is submission by the other side. That's peace, comes on the other side submits. It's a little different understanding of peace than at least I think the Western mindset has. Thank you, Ashley, for your contribution. Thank you, Bonnie, for your super chats and your participation. Bonnie is a YouTube member, Razi, and she writes, the mythical Allah is more important than your own irreplaceable life. Oslo was criminal, and you were a young person and you remember that pretty well. And we see that now 30 plus years later, really not much has changed.
Yeah, I was a young leftist who was super happy that we finally have peace. And yeah, I grew up. I am, I'm not in my 30s, but I think I fall into the category of the peace generation. By the way, Barry has some, I haven't read all the chat, but I see some nice comments from Barry, and one that is, and I've been following Jonathan forever before I even knew about objectivism, and he always remembers Rand. So yeah, you and me both. I've also I mentioned on the show in the past, I used to watch Jonathan on Fox News before I knew he was an objectivist. I only knew that he was the one who made the most sense there, which was more of a challenge back then than it is now. I know now it doesn't sound like much because no offense to anybody on Fox, but anyway, we are out of time. Not gonna get Jonathan in trouble. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining me. Thank you, everybody in the chat, everybody for watching, and the reality show starts in a minute or so.